Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Juliette Mann. Our top stories this hour. Palestinian officials say 250 people have been killed after one of the deadliest nights of bombardment in Gaza, as Israel considers a new truce proposal. A somber vigil in Bethlehem. Festive celebrations are scaled back as the conflict casts a shadow over the holy city. China removes tariffs for some of Africa's most resource-rich countries as Beijing looks to boost agricultural imports. And a fruitful drop. It's grape harvest time in Spain, where one Chinese family is making award-winning wine. Authorities in Gaza say 250 people have been killed in one of the deadliest nights of Israeli bombardment since the conflict with Hamas began. Dozens of Palestinians were killed in an attack on the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza, while others died in an airstrike in the south of the Strip. The Israeli army says a fighter jet was involved in a mission to kill a Hamas commander in the city of Khan Yunis. Our correspondent Noor Harazin is in central Gaza. Good to see you, Noor. What is the latest on the fatalities in Gaza?
Well, yes, it was one of the deadliest days, the deadliest overnight. Actually, we did not sleep during this night due to the continuous Israeli shelling and bombing, especially here in Middle Gaza. In a joint statement between the Palestinian Health Ministry here in Gaza and the Palestinian Governmental Media Office, they said that the death toll in Gaza over the past 24 hours is up to 250. And let's talk about the highlights of this number. In Khan Yunis, there was several Israeli strikes that hit central Khan Yunis, Dwar al-Siniya, other streets, Salah family home, where 22 members of the family, mostly women and children, were killed. 10 people are still under the rubble until now, after almost 6 hours after the Israeli strike, as the paramedics and the civil forces are not able to rescue them under the rubble. In Al-Maghazi refugee camp, it was a massacre. Actually, we were here inside the hospital when the ambulances started arriving with the dead bodies and the big number of people injured. According to the Palestinian medical sources, 70 people were killed in the Israeli series of attacks on Al-Maghazi refugee camp overnight, while hundreds were reported injured.
Let's talk about aid, food aid in particular, because there are reports that that aid isn't getting to those in the most need.
Well, yes, first of all, Egypt is allowing a very little number of the humanitarian aid trucks to enter the Gaza Strip, which is not enough to meet the needs of Gaza. Here is what is happening. These trucks enter Gaza. They mostly go to the UN storages in Rafah City and in West Khan Yunis. And most of this aid is being distributed on the people in these areas, on the displaced people. However, there is large areas around the Gaza Strip that are not getting any aid. For example, here in Middle Gaza, we're talking about the big city of Deir al-Balah and all the camps surrounding Deir al-Balah, like Al-Maghazi refugee camp, Al-Burej refugee camp, Al-Nusayrat refugee camp. And actually, people who are residing in these camps are now evacuating their homes, and they are in dire need for any aid, any help. However, the UN is not operating in this area. It does not distribute much aid in these areas. If people find anything in the market, it would be 10th the price. Now, talking about Northern Gaza is like an isolated area from the Gaza Strip. Since the last humanitarian truce expired, and since then, zero humanitarian aid entered Northern Gaza, and we're talking about around 500,000 people who are still inside Northern Gaza. They did not evacuate their homes. They are in dire need of water, food, and the other supplies.
Thank you for that update, Noor Harazin, our correspondent in Gaza. Well, Israel's Prime Minister has been at a parliamentary session to discuss a new truce proposal that was drafted by Egypt. Benjamin Netanyahu will later chair a meeting of Israel's war cabinet. Well, let's talk to Associated Press reporter Isabel Debray, who's in Bethlehem. Isabel, Prime Minister Netanyahu meeting his war cabinet today. Is there any update on these diplomatic efforts for a new truce?
So we're just getting a speech in from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right now after he visited troops in Gaza and then addressed his Likud, right-wing Likud party in Israel. And here's what he said. He vowed to expand the ground offensive in the coming days. And he said the fight will only last longer. This is a long battle and it isn't close to being finished. And this mirrors pretty much what we're hearing from Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, who was actually, this shadowy leader gave a rare public statement to Palestinians today. And here's what he said. He said something similar, that Hamas would not surrender, that it would not submit to Israel's conditions whatsoever, and that it would continue to fight to the end. So these are two statements from leaders who do not seem like they are negotiating whatsoever. But behind the scenes, we are seeing these certain signs that negotiations are moving forward. For instance, one of the leaders of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which took part in the October 7th attack on Israel, is currently in Cairo meeting with Egyptian mediators. That comes just a couple days after Ismail Haniyeh, a political leader of Hamas from Qatar, flew also to Cairo and is meeting with those mediators. And we heard today from mediators in Qatar and Egypt, we confirmed that report that you're talking about, this three-phased truce that involves, first of all, a 2-week ceasefire in which there would be a limited exchange of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jail for Israeli captives held in Gaza. And then it actually goes on to address the sort of day after Gaza question. It allows for the creation of a transitional Palestinian government and even also the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip. So this is quite ambitious at this point, especially because that position right there outlined completely flies in the face of the professed goal of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's constantly saying we will not stop until we completely destroy Hamas. So we will have to watch that war cabinet meeting later very closely. He will be talking about the hostage situation, how to get those hostages home, and he will also be talking about the state of negotiations. Juliet?
So, Isabel, that's what's happening behind the scenes, if you like. But let's talk about military action. The IDF strikes on both Gaza and on Lebanon. What more can you tell us about the military operation?
Like your correspondent Noor said, on the ground, there are strikes continuing in all directions. We were monitoring today strikes that were happening in Khan Yunis. The Israeli military said today that it had destroyed a cement tunnel that was used, it said, to make, cement factory, that was used to make tunnels that Hamas uses to transport weapons and militants. And it also destroyed a weapons manufacturing site in the area of Khan Yunis. Also, we heard from Palestinians in Khan Yunis that previously had not been evacuated, that they received flyers that were dropped from Israeli warplanes asking them to leave and go further south to the city of Rafah, this place where people are being pushed into this smaller and smaller area. We also have seen in the northern Gaza Strip, Jabalia refugee camp. It's a Hamas stronghold that days ago Israel said it had taken full control over. But we are hearing reports of intense gunfights still happening there. Now let's go to Lebanon. This is quite interesting. You know, we've seen yesterday that the Israeli military said it had launched wide-scale attacks on Hezbollah targets across southern Lebanon. And this was in response, it said, to a barrage of rockets coming from Lebanon. It's blamed Hezbollah that were fired across the border into Israeli border communities. Now, all of these communities have been evacuated, so there were no injuries, but there actually was a fair amount of damage. And we also saw another couple anti-tank guided missiles shot from Lebanon today toward Israel. So that's just the latest. And of course, this is a border that everybody is watching very closely to see if there will be any escalation regionally.
Interesting to hear about this barrage of rockets still coming into Israel. Isabel, thank you very much. Isabel Debray from the Associated Press. Christmas events have been scaled back in Bethlehem, with the holy city in the West Bank resembling a ghost town. Tourists, marching bands and festive lights have been replaced with security forces as fighting continues in Gaza. Our correspondent Fang Yilei has more.
No festive lights, no colorful parade or soaring Christmas tree at the birthplace of Jesus in Bethlehem. Instead, the mood is somber.
Bishop Council decided not to make a big celebration as a sign of solidarity with the victims of the war. We cannot do it in the street. So we need, in this difficult time, to strengthen our people by the prayer. And we continue celebrating spiritually the Christmas, not outside, but inside our hearts.
About a mile from the Church of the Nativity, Shepherd's Field is another significant holy site in Bethlehem, where the angel first announced on Jesus' birth. Usually around Christmas, it is packed with hundreds of groups of international pilgrims. But this year, as you can see, they have been replaced by an abnormal tranquility, reminding people of the impact of the conflict.
The repercussions are also being felt beyond the church steps. Local vendors face a devastating loss of income. Their large inventory in anticipation of a bustling holiday season, now at risk.
They open just for getting fresh air, because this wood carvings, they can't be stay in the dark all the time, and the main source of income is tourists. So people are suffering from this situation, and no jobs, no work, because of the lack of tourism.
Hotels in Bethlehem, boasting over 5,000 rooms, are usually fully booked during this peak season. Safety concerns and travel restrictions are driving widespread cancellations.
Today is nothing, maybe 6-7 rooms in each hotel. More than half is closed. It's cheaper for them than they open, because if they are open, they need some 4 or 5 employees and they didn't get their money.
While a few tourists are still arriving, they remain wary.
Everywhere in Israel also here. It's not
stable.
Quiet. It's not quiet. We don't know what is happening.
Authorities say more than 70% of the local economy is tied to tourism. They estimate a loss of about $200 million by year's end in some sectors.
It's about the aggression against our people in Gaza Strip. Since that time, the tourism sector was stopped. Even if we continue with having these celebrations, I believe that we will receive 0 visitors, because West Bank under military closure, and Bethlehem is isolated now than other Palestinian cities.
Bethlehem's Christmas festivities have traditionally mirrored the state of Israeli-Palestinian relations. It's widely believed economic recovery can only come with the arrival of real peace. Feng Yilei, CGTN, the West Bank.
Orthodox Christians in Ukraine are celebrating Christmas on December the 25th for the first time. The country's traditionally used the Julian calendar, which is also used by Russia, where Christmas falls on the 7th of January. But in a further shift away from Moscow, it's now marking the holiday according to the Western calendar. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the change unites the country. Students are blocking the streets of Serbia's capital, Belgrade, in protest against the results of last week's election, which the opposition claims was rigged. Dozens of anti-government demonstrators were arrested on Sunday after they tried to smash their way into City Hall. Riot police responded with tear gas. International observers say the ruling party of President Alexander Vucic gained an unfair advantage through media bias and vote buying. Vucic has dismissed the allegations. Thousands of migrants have set off on foot from southern Mexico in an effort to reach the border with the United States. Most are from Central and South America, some are also from the Caribbean. It comes as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due in Mexico this week for talks with President Obrador on how to curb mass migration. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Reaping the rewards of a bold move, China makes its mark on Spain's wine industry.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Palestinian officials say 250 people have been killed after one of the deadliest nights of bombardment in Gaza, as Israel considers a new truce proposal. And a sombre vigil in Bethlehem. Festive celebrations are scaled back as the conflict casts a shadow over the holy city. 6 African nations have been granted tariff-free access to the Chinese market. The countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, are some of the most resource-rich on the continent. It's part of an initiative to strengthen ties with Africa and import more agricultural products. Our correspondent Robert Nagila has more.
From the 25th of December 2023, China says it will exempt 98% of taxable products from paying tariffs when accessing markets across mainland China from 6 African countries. Among them are Madagascar, Mali, the Gambia and Angola. Now, what this means is that almost all the products for export from these countries heading towards China will be exempt from paying things like duty, for example. Now, it is not the first time that China is doing this. On December 1st, 2022, last year, China exempted a number of African countries, low-income African countries, from paying tariffs for the goods that they were exporting. And here we're talking about close to 9,000 products accessing various Chinese markets across mainland China. So this is a win for these African countries and a good Christmas present for them. But more importantly, it goes to show the cooperation between China and Africa and how deeply cemented the friendship between these two sides is, not just in the past, in the present, but also moving forward.
Croatia is looking to attract more Chinese investments as the country recovers from an economic downturn caused by the pandemic. CGTN's Alyosha Milenkovic has more.
A truck brings more equipment that is to be installed at the FACC construction site in Jakovje. The Chinese-owned and Austria-based company has begun work on a $23 million expansion of its current factory near the Croatian capital, Zagreb. And workers are busy, as they have to finish everything by next summer. The construction work here is in full swing. When finished, an additional 350 workers will find job in this building alone. And they will produce parts for the interiors of Airbus, Boeing and Chinese Comac airplanes. This is an extension to the current factory, where 250 workers already produce parts of the interior for many passenger jets. Interior panels, overhead compartments, they produce here everything besides the seats. And now, increased demand has created a need to expand production.
There are 2 motives for this expansion. The first is the increase of the capacity of the existing production, and second is the increase of the production scope. We will be ready for the expected production increased by the aeroplane manufacturers, and we will be able to produce more parts for them.
FACC is just one example of successful Chinese investments in Croatia. The China Road and Bridge Corporation opened its doors in 2018, winning the tender for construction of the Pelješac Bridge, the largest in Croatia. Norinco's direct investment in a wind farm in the town of Senj, worth over $220 million, followed it. But then, COVID struck and things slowed a lot. Now the Croatians have invited the Chinese to continue where they left off during the pandemic.
Croatia's attitude towards the Chinese investors is positive. I would say that it would be good for Chinese investors to check Croatian market potential, particularly in the areas of energy generation, infrastructure, logistics and railways.
Professor Novotny admits that the atmosphere surrounding Croatia and China collaboration is not as favorable as before, mostly due to the political shifts inside the EU. And he hopes that the summit in Beijing will help Croatia attract more joint projects with China, like the FACC factory. Aljoša Milenković, CGTN, Jakovlje.
Missions to Jupiter's icy moons and China's youngest ever crew blasting off to the space station. Just a few of the out-of-this-world milestones this year. I spoke to Professor James Head, who trained astronaut crews and participated in the Apollo moon program, about this year in space.
Well, you know, every year I tell my new students, this is the best possible time you could be going into planetary science. And I'm thinking, wait, I say that every year, but it's absolutely true. And 2023 was absolutely fabulous. We launched JUICE, the European Space Agency, to the Jupiter system. We have the Juno already there. We have Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter going on. We have 2 Mars rovers, 1 Mars orbiter. Great results from the Chinese rover on Mars, etc. India broke the curse, if you will, and was successful in landing Chandrayaan-3 on the moon. This is spectacular. One of the best things is that China opened up its access to their Chang'e 5 lunar return samples to the international community, and NASA approved U.S.-funded investigators to actually apply for those samples. So that's great news. But that's not all. I mean, my gosh, the orbital things that were going on in Earth orbit. We celebrated the 23rd anniversary of human presence in space with the International Space Station. And Chenzhou, I mean, there were like fabulous missions. The Chinese space station was completed. The youngest crew ever was set up. Really great to see those 30-year-olds. I mean, why not? You know, that's the way. That's the future. So it was a fabulous time. I mean, I can't. The only thing is that 2024 seems to be even better.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about 2024, because for China in particular, it's set to be a big year for space.
You know, I'm really looking forward to the Chang'e 6 mission, which will be the first lunar sample return from the far side of the moon. I've worked closely with my colleagues in China, talking about the greatest landing sites, and actually co-authored a paper with them on the Chang'e 6 landing site. So we're totally excited about that. The international community is just totally excited. We don't have samples from the far side of the moon. That's half the moon, okay? And one of the things is, you know, when you go to the moon or space, you end up with essentially a you basically carry your house with you. It's really, you need the protection, okay? So the spacecraft is the house. And that's like a turtle. You know, turtles carry their house with them, okay? And then they just curl up inside. But you can't do that if you're going to stay on the moon. So we've been actually trying to understand how you can reduce the mass you have to take to the moon. You don't want to take a lot of bricks and cinder blocks to the moon. So we've actually been doing research on biobricks. This is a biobrick. And basically, if you look at it, it's fairly light. It would be grown in situ, like on the moon. It's made up of mushrooms. It's mycelium. So you take the spores, et cetera, the seeds, if you will, to the moon, you mix them with water and other regolith and things like this, and you build these biobricks. So we're doing this research for the future of NASA to try to understand how we can reduce the upmass and build houses on the moon. And this is really important, because the last thing is that when you do this, we're actually looking at how you apply this to building houses on the Earth, so that we can reduce the catastrophe coming from international migration and things like that, where people don't have a place to live. So all of these applications really come back to the Earth and help as well.
Now, many of you might have a favourite tipple. I know I do. But not all of us go so far as growing our own grapes. The Xu family are reaping the rewards of a bold move from China some 10 years ago to their own vineyard in Spain, which has now grown into an award-winning business. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
Harvest time at this historic Spanish vineyard. With vines over 150 years old, some of Spain's finest wines are produced here. It's also the first vineyard in the country owned and run by a Chinese family. Xu Shuping went from falling in love with Spanish wine to exporting it to China and finally putting down roots here in the famous Ribera del Duero region.
This journey began around 20 years ago. For us Chinese at the time, it's fair to say that we couldn't tell the difference between a good and a bad wine. To get where we are now has been a very difficult journey, but we are still working hard, studying hard, and learning every day.
Respecting the land and local traditions, they have enlisted expert wine grower Javier Balbás, the fourth generation of his family, to grow these highly valued grapes. Passion, vision and dedication have made the Xu family wines a success. Their award-winning Alilian brand is sold in Michelin-star restaurants across Europe, while European wine culture has also recently become a Chinese fascination. Some put the burgeoning Chinese middle class at over 300 million people, and their thirst for high-end European products like olive oil and wine is on the rise too. It's a market that could double by 2030. Julian belongs to the next generation of the budding Xu family wine dynasty. Born in Spain, he says that Spanish wines are now challenging established French and Italian labels in China for prestige.
Spanish wine is better value for money than other European wines, so it's becoming better known, and that means more Chinese investment in production wine shops and quality wines here. China is really catching up. There are many wine experts, sommeliers and tasters who understand and appreciate the quality of our wine, so we're beginning to focus a lot more on the Chinese market.
Julian says Alilian will soon sell 50% of its production in China, part of the success story of Spain's international wine exports. Sales are increasing by around 10% a year, according to the Spanish Institute for Foreign Trade, or ISEX, with China among the fastest growing markets. For trailblazers like the Xu family, this year's harvest points towards a fruitful future. Ken Brown, CGTN, Ribera del Duero.
And finally, what better way to burn off the Christmas calories than head out for a run? Well, thousands of people check out the unofficial Santa dress code turned out in the Spanish capital Madrid for an annual charity race. There was even a guest appearance by St. Nicholas himself, setting the pace for the quickest runners. Well, this year's event raised money for the International Red Cross. The headlines again. Palestinian officials say 250 people have been killed after one of the deadliest nights of bombardment in Gaza, as Israel considers a new truce proposal. And a somber vigil in Bethlehem. Festive celebrations are scaled back as the conflict casts a shadow over the holy city. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. I'm back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, though, it's World Insight. For now, from all the team here in London, goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.